Good evening and welcome back to the committee's fifth meeting in 2021, which is following on from an earlier part of the meeting which took place this morning. Can I just remind everyone, please, to make sure their mobile phones are on silent, and just to remind everyone that this meeting is being conducted in virtual format. Apologies have been received from Stuart Stevenson and Richard Lyle, and I believe that Mike Rumbles is unavoidably detained but is hoping to join us later. This is agenda item 4, which is the impact of post-Brexit requirements on the Scottish exports and supply chains. This is an evidence session on the impact on those supply chains, and we'll take evidence in a round table format from a panel of stakeholders from across the food production and logistics sector. And I'd like to welcome Mike Park, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association, Ian McWatt, the Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Policy, Science and Operations Food Standards Scotland, and Belinda Miller, the Head of Economic Development and Protective Services for Aberdeenshire Council, Eddie Green, the Head of the Cold Chain, DFDS, Georgina Wright, who is the Head of Sales for Maui UK, Tom Gibson, the Director of Market Development Quality Meat Scotland, and Andrew Charles, who's a partner in J. Charles LLP. Now, James Cook was to attend this evening, but unfortunately is unable now to attend and has submitted a written bit of evidence which has been circulated to committee members. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to our discussion bit, and I'm going to ask committee members, it says in my notes here, to kick off discussions. I hope they're not going to kick off discussions. I hope they're going to introduce discussions on a few broad themes during the meeting. And then what I'll do is I'll invite witnesses to contribute their views to this. So if you want to come in, have to put R in the box, and I will bring you in. Of course, the danger is if you don't put R in the box and no one puts an R in the box, the last one to look away on the witnesses will be the person who called in. So either look away quickly or put an R in the box. I will want to try and bring in as many of you as possible. So the shorter you can keep your answers, the more chance that I can bring you in and or bring somebody else in, which means that you won't upset them. So that's the rules of the game, as it were. And the Deputy Convener, Maureen Watt, is going to introduce the first topic. Maureen.
Thank you, Convener, and good evening, panel. Thank you very much for joining us. I just think to set the context, I wondered if some members of the panel could give examples of what the new non-tariff barriers they are experiencing are, and probably I'd like to direct that towards Tom Gibson first, perhaps, and then Andrew Charles.
There we go, Tom, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. I think in terms of non-tariff barriers, we've seen a fair few in terms of challenges with our exports. We know that there's a whole host of issues in terms of exports with the export health certification. We know that there's some new customs procedures that exporters have to follow. So there's a whole host of issues there, and there's also issues around rules of origin, etc. So these are the main things that are giving us difficulties when we're exporting to EU under the new agreements.
And Andrew, hi.
We're experiencing everything. You know, if you want to be a successful exporter, you need reliability, you need quality, you need consistency, and you need to be competitive. And this Brexit agreement has smashed every single one of those principles out the water. The forms are incredibly complicated and open to interpretation. So customs posts can very easily hold up lorries if they want to, and if there's government will to do that. So I think we've got a huge certification problem, but an even bigger problem comes for the small to medium-sized exporter that's sort of been forgotten. These charges go from £150 to £220 per invoice transaction. That kills every single small exporter and knocks out an awful lot of the medium-sized ones in their ability to pay premium prices on the market. So we have a massive problem. It needs to be sorted, and government need to put in some sort of support package there, particularly with the certification charges, to try and get the competitiveness back on the market.
Okay, I think we'll come back to the specifics later on, but can I ask Belinda what role local authorities play in meeting new export requirements? Belinda, how has the landscape changed for you in Aberdeenshire?
Thank you, Deputy Convener. We have experienced the need for a team that's dedicated only to working on export health certificates. We are not involved in any other part of the setup. We just are issuing export health certificates. And what we've found is that we're only dealing with the single load exports at this point, because all of the groupage, in other words, different loads from different companies are being dealt with elsewhere. So we're finding we're working Monday to Friday. Generally, the end of the week is the busier part of the week. And what we're finding is that it's a fairly, I suppose the best description is we're learning as we go, because there's obviously a whole pile of new information that we've got to gather that we haven't had to do before. Thank you.
And in terms of your finance and resources and the level of readiness for the 1st of January, you know, how has that gone? There has been money for local authorities to meet this. Have you managed to access that? And, you know, were you as prepared as you could be, or are there other problems that have come up that weren't thought about? Or
well, I would say that what we found was that we knew this was going to happen, and we knew, because Peterhead and Fraserburgh are key ports in Scotland, that it was going to be a significant amount of work for us for issuing of export health certificates. We've been working on this probably for 2 years, but we put a dedicated team on it since June of 2020, and they had to begin, and I think they probably discovered lots of things that they didn't know until they actually put their heads down. So everything from inspecting of vessels, which we had to do, and we've done over 296 vessels had to be inspected before the 1st of January. Significant amount of getting ready in terms of the paperwork, how the systems would work, interpreting them. So we did all that, and it's been in place now, obviously, since the 1st of January. In terms of accessing the funding, we did get the funding as each local authority did for Brexit preparedness. We have utilised it in terms of to use that against the dedicated team. But in honesty, it's mainly staff time that we have had the greatest sort of resource side of things. We didn't actually need necessarily the financial funding to deal with it. We needed human resource to deal with it.
Does anyone else want to come in at this point? Sorry, Convener, did you?
No, well, I just see that Emma Harper would like to come in, so I'm very happy to bring Emma in at this stage, which may widen it out a bit. And then I see Ian's wanting to come in. So Emma, if you go first, and then Ian, I'll come to you.
Okay, thanks, Convener. It's a specific question to pick up on what Andrew said about the paperwork and the process. Some of the information that I got from a local fisherman, but also processor, West Coast Sea Products in Kirkcudbright, they said that there was a massive issue with VAT, and that they had to register for VAT in France, even though it was going to be, it would be able to be claimed back, but it was going to take a whole month. So they've got scallops that are frozen now, that they can't ship out. So is that still an issue widespread across other parts of the industry, as well as our Queen and King scallop exporters in Kirkcudbright? Is that something that is an issue across the rest of Scotland?
So we will go to Andrew, and then we'll go to Ian, because that was directed more at Andrew than Ian, I think. So Andrew, if you want to head off on that, and then I'll come to Ian.
Yes, the VAT has been a financial burden. We've had to set up accounts and lodge money in those accounts, because when you export something now, you've got to have that money there for it to be paid immediately. It's the cash has got to be there to be drawn down by the haulier or the clearing company straight away. So that's placed a burden on the companies that have to do that. Yeah, that's a massive problem. The whole, can I just say, the whole thing, the whole export, whoever sat down and considered this to be a reasonable free export system has really got to question what's gone on here. What's been created is a system to destroy exporting. There is absolutely nothing easy about what industry has been asked to do. We were prepared, we were ready to go, we had everything in place, but a lot of the stuff that we've been hit with has been open to interpretation. It's been different from one checkpoint to another. The haulage companies have been battered pillar to post trying to get our product through. And it really is incredibly difficult to understand how we've been led down this path with this agreement.
Right, Andrew, I mean, I very much take your point. I think the committee is quite keen to find solutions as well. So love to hear solutions when we get to them. So Ian, can I bring you in, and then I'll go to Georgina, if I may. So Ian.
Thank you, convener. Very interesting to hear Andrew's comments there, and I have to say we do in FSS recognise all of that, as indeed we do recognise some of the challenges that Belinda from Aberdeenshire Council has articulated. I think it's fair to say that this is a process that is new for everyone, whether that be from the government side, local authority side, or an industry side. And feedback that has been presented to Food Standards Scotland in the groupage export side of things is that, you know, we are facing unprecedented challenge insofar as the number of issues that are holding up the certification process, principally around information that's been supplied from the smaller to medium-sized enterprises who have reported back to FSS that essentially a lot of their concerns are around actually not knowing what it was they were having to prepare for right up until Christmas Eve. Now, we in FSS have been working closely with industry to ensure that the requirements for certification were clear. But the complexity around this, and picking up on Andrew's point around the design of this system, the simple fact of this is that we are a third country and having to respond to the requirements of the European Union insofar as certification components are concerned. And in doing so, there is, I would absolutely acknowledge, significant complexity in that system. And the range of issues that we are finding that are slowing down the certification process are actually fully evidencing that.
Okay, we'll go to Georgina, and then Peter Chapman, I think you want to come in.
Yes, thank you, convener. I'd just like to quickly summarise the sort of before and after. Before, a thing called a CMR was required, which was effectively a delivery note. Now the paperwork is the export health certificate, an export declaration, an import declaration, a transit document, the trailer seal. That number has to be on all documentation. For organic, we require on top of that a certificate of inspection. For export, all of this has to be loaded into a system called Chiefs. and then for import into Europe into a system called Traces and Connex, and there's a transit document registration as well. So we've moved from, you know, a sort of small pile of paper to an enormous pile of paper in the space of a month.
Okay, I'm going to change my mind, as I can do as convener. I think, Eddie, it's probably better to come to you and then go to Peter Chapman. So, Eddie, if you'd like to come in on that.
Yeah, I think to echo what has just been said, really, by Georgina, the complexity. Our job is to carry a lot of the fish out of Scotland. What we've seen from the start, it was extremely complex, a lot of unfamiliarity, a lot of the things that should gel together, IT systems, state operated French and British IT systems failing. But we can say it's got much, much better in the last couple of weeks. The complexity hasn't gone away, but I think familiarity has improved. But what I think the overriding thing, picking up on Andrew Charles's point, that the cost and the time to market have not gone away. You know, and I think that's the key thing about making the industry competitive. And our costs have rocketed, and of course we have to pass those on to our customers. But and I do feel, if I may say, that the application of some of the processes, and I fully accept that it's necessary to adhere to them, but they are very, very rigid. And for the amount of checking that's being done on the UK side compared to, say, what's being done when the goods arrive in France, there is, I think there may be some scope to relax some of the application of some of these checks, and maybe not certify or check every single consignment, but actually certify the supplier. I think perhaps Georgina might even want to comment on that, because she's got experience of exporting to the Far East previously, and I think she may comment that it's been easier to export to the Far East than it is to continental Europe right now.
Sorry, Eddie, could you just clarify that before I go to Peter Chapman, just so I understand it? What you're saying is the checks that are carried out when entering France or into Europe are much more stringent than goods coming into the United Kingdom. Is that what you're saying, sir?
Yeah, I didn't actually say that, but that is the case at the moment, because there's this sort of a time lapse or derogation for 6 months where goods can flow freely into the UK until the 1st of July, whereas we're actually everything's being checked at the border on entry to continental Europe. So that's another issue, actually. But for the time being, my point was actually we're taking truckloads of fish into France. Some of them are receiving full turnout, full examination of the goods. Others just having a cursory check. So, you know, in as much that the seal of the truck is checked, or the back doors are opened and the goods are looked at. And bear in mind that we're taking the same products from the same customers to the same destinations day in, day out. So I think it's important to consider the way that the rules are being applied in Scotland and across the UK. We're carrying fish from other parts of the UK as well, to ensure that we're not making it too difficult for ourselves to carry out all these tasks.
Okay, Peter Chapman, you wanted to come in, Peter.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, my questions are about the issues that we've had at the depot at Loch Hall. So it's both Ian and Eddie, I think, maybe could answer some of these. I mean, as far as Ian's concerned, were you content that you had enough staff, Food Standards Scotland staff at the depot at the various depots? One, enough, and two, were they properly trained for the job they needed to do? And do you believe that your staff were too particular? I mean, Eddie made the point that maybe we're being a bit too picky about what we're doing. And so to Ian, had you enough staff? Were they well enough trained? And I would just ask for Eddie to comment on that as well, how he felt the hub was working. And I'm pleased to hear that things are better now, but you'll maybe give us a feel as to how things have moved on since the first week or so. So Ian first, can you address these issues, please?
Certainly. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for the question. So in terms of whether or not we had enough staff, we as an organisation were preparing for resourcing these hubs as far back as the 24th of August. when FSS became involved in this. We, as an organisation, employ a large number of veterinary personnel and environmental health officers in our organisation. And in our discussions with each of the hubs, we had consideration of the service demands from each of them. So each hub gave us an idea of what they expected the service demand to be. The Animal and Plant Health Agency had used detailed modelling to determine what the certification time period should be, and they suggest 45 minutes to 2 hours per certificate would be required. We had, and also in advance of that, Peter, we had access to the Export Health Certification training system. And in doing so, that then allowed us to make a determination and agree specific service requirements for each of the hubs. Now, at the start, from the 1st of January, in fact, actually from the 31st of December, we had 11 staff in between to service the 3 hubs. That was not what we had available to our disposal. I could have, from day one, I could have trebled the amount of staff that were actually deployed to the hubs if that had been required. But what that would have meant in practice is that staff would have been tripping over themselves, to be quite honest, because whilst there was a lengthy period for some export certificates to be completed, actually the numbers of certificates that were going through, there was more than enough capacity. And indeed, had I required it, I could have deployed many more staff into the hub. So it wasn't an issue of the numbers of staff. I also was pretty confident the numbers of staff that we put in were actually also well experienced and suitably trained to undertake that role. You also asked about whether or not we're being too picky, and I think there's perhaps specific reference to some loads being poured over and some export certificates actually taking as long as 10 to 11 hours to complete. And I'll go back to my previous comment where I made reference to just some of the challenges that our hub colleagues are finding in the logistics hubs, and this is across all 3 hubs. And I believe that the local authority colleagues that are also certifying directly to businesses are experiencing the same things. But we're finding that there are missing supplier declarations, there are incorrect identification marks and labelling issues, there are incorrect batch numbers, incorrect net weights, incorrect commodity codes, there are errors in product schedules, there are incorrect importer details, incorrect approval numbers, incorrect trailer numbers, incorrect destinations being put on the supplying paperwork. And for every single one of these errors or missing paperwork, for example, it creates back pressure in the system. And the logistics hubs have had a horrific task to try and unpick that and to try and gain resolution to that, and indeed try to match up loads where the paperwork is correct so that it can be processed in a timely fashion. So it's not absolutely not about being too picky. Indeed, we've had issues coming out of France and Holland where we've had loads of fish that have gone and they've sailed through, just as Eddie made reference to, they sailed through on day one and they were held up for 6 hours on the following day because the ink that was used on the stamp didn't meet with the importing officer's requirements. Now, there is a huge degree of inconsistency that has surfaced from border controls in Holland and in France that we are, through DEFRA, the competent authority in this, raising with the Commission in an attempt to achieve better consistency. But if it had not been for FSS staff actually going through some of the loads with a fine-tooth comb, we would have seen loads held up for much longer in continental Europe. We would have seen consignments being conferred to landfill. And my view was it was much better and much safer to try and resolve the issues and make sure that we were satisfied that export health certificates and supporting documentation were all absolutely correct to avoid any waste or delays at the border control points.
So I think
Okay,
can I just say another thing?
Go on, Peter.
I was just going to say, just to finally, Ian, are things getting better? Are you finding that the paperwork now is properly filled in, and therefore your job your guys' jobs at the hubs are now becoming a bit easier? I would like to think that that's the case. Is that true?
It is getting better, and as Eddie has mentioned himself, we are seeing improvements there. I think there is still some way to go, to be honest. We're still seeing levels of rework around the 25 to almost 50% of certificates are having to be reworked. And for the main reasons for rework, I've already described them. To support the industry further, Peter, what FSS has managed to find money from my budget to support the hubs and indeed the FSS transaction side of that by engaging the Scottish Manufacturing Advisory Service, and they're working through the hubs and working with us to look at the processes to see, look, is there any scope to improve on this further? The Scottish Government has also provided funding for 2 Brexit advisors working directly with Seafood Scotland. So I'm looking at this very positively, but there's still some way to go. And we still obviously need to await the outcome from discussions directly with the Commission to address the irregular treatment of loads on the continent side.
Okay, now what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring in Eddie Green, and then I'd like to go to Jamie Halcrow-Johnson for a question. So, Eddie Green, if you could come in.
Yeah, for sure. I can say that when Ian speaks, there's no exaggeration at all. All the things he said, I would say are true. All that we experienced with the chaos with paperwork from all directions. And it led to us suspending our service, in fact, for 10 days for the groupage service. So, but that's back on track now. And I think it is correct to say that things are much better. People are more educated, understanding what needs to be done. So I think, and certainly no criticism of anybody involved. And when the words are chosen, being picky about the consignments, I think it's an observation from our point that that there has been a different level of control over goods previously taken to, say, Heathrow Airport than those being taken to continental Europe. I think it would be good to, I'm just trying to share the experience we have in France, particularly, where things have got easier. And some, as said, some loads are completely turned out and checked, and others are going through quite quickly. But I do take the point that Ian makes as well, that we're seeing different countries applying the standards in different ways, and even between 2 border control points in different ports in France, that we get a different interpretation. And we challenge those on a daily basis and get those ironed out. So things are coming close together, but it's been quite extreme in the first few weeks.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Oh, thank you very much, convener. And actually, it was really on that topic, and if I can direct it back to Eddie again, apologies for that. You and Ian obviously suggested there that the issues around things like that have been raised before, wrong coloured ink and blocks on different borders. I think you mentioned France, and Ian mentioned Holland as well. And I'm just wondering, are we seeing a real? You mentioned a real inconsistency over different borders. How big an issue has that been? How large was that part of the initial problems? Because obviously there's only so much that can be done in this country if they're being stopped by perhaps inexperienced border officers in France or in other places. And are you are you hopeful that's been the importance of that has been put across to, say, the French government, and things are moving slightly more easily through Calais into Boulogne-sur-Mer?
So let's go to Ian. Let's go to Ian first, and then I'll come to you. I would ask you both to be relatively short, because I want to go back to Maureen for a couple more questions before we move on to the next topic. So Ian, followed by Eddie.
Thank you. And convener, if it's at all possible, I also have an important point to make in relation to costs, if time permits. But, Jamie, the point you raised, this is what really concerned us at the start, because in some respects the feedback loop was not quite there, and it's only working with the likes of EFDS and the hubs that we're now getting a feel for just some of the real challenges that hauliers have been facing on the other side of the Straits. I would say that it was a significant contributory factor, and still is a significant contributory factor, both in Holland and in France, in relation to customs officers there interpreting the rules in different ways. And we are continuing to find, for example, in Holland, we found that a load was held up because we had not translated all of the fish species into Dutch, and there is no requirement for that. A load was also held back because the colour of the certifying ink that the officer had signed was different from the health stamp ink, and there's no requirements there at all. So there's some funny business going on there that we are relaying with a degree of urgency to DEFRA to discuss with the Commission, and we're simply waiting on the response from that. There has been an initial commitment through discussions with DEFRA that they will actually look into this, but I'm waiting on the response from that, to be honest.
Ian, go quickly on costs. Ian, quickly on costs, and then I'll come to you, Eddie.
And it's really just to make it clear that it's in everyone's interest to make groupage work. Estimates that were provided to us from Scottish local authorities indicated that as a result of Brexit, the burden of certification on local authorities and business in Scotland would be between 150 to 250,000 certificates required annually. Previously, all certificates that local authorities were used to would be a single consignment from a small business that would then go to another third country. And a range of charges would be applied there. Equally, small businesses could also engage their own private veterinarian. And we have had a range of charges, as Andrew referred to, actually much more expensive, ranging from £100 to £800 for one certificate. Now, the whole purpose behind groupage here, and this is why it's critically important that we make this work, is that the burden on local authorities for certification is not, they just simply do not have the resources to address this. Equally, the industry could not afford it. So if we, by grouping loads together and having one or maybe two export health certificates for a group consignment, drastically reduces the costs. Now, we are working on sending out our invoices to the hubs in the next week or so, and it will then become clear just what cost burden is passed on to industry. But the green shoots in all of this is that we are getting better, but we really do need to maintain momentum in ensuring that groupage remains a success in Scotland.
Okay, Eddie, briefly.
Very briefly, I think it was the first couple of weeks were very much lack of familiarity, I should say, with the systems, and the rules were almost being made up as we went along by certain offices. The things, again, the examples there were colours of the ink and stamps and whatever, all relevant and correct, and we experienced the same. We were going back to the different authorities saying, no, these are the rules. It shouldn't be this way. But I will, maintain that it has got a lot better, and we see our main port of entry is Boulogne, and we see a fairly consistent approach now to the clearances going through fairly quickly every day. But just to reiterate the point that keeps coming up, the cost doesn't go away. The cost of doing all of this is huge, and that message has to get through very loud.
Belinda, just before we move on back to Maureen, could you just clarify the costs involved? Are local authorities making more money, and therefore will they be taking on more staff to speed up the process? I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Convener. So we actually had a fee that was agreed for non-EU, before the transition of £79 per EHC, export health certificate. I was given delegated authority by the council to set a fee based on what we thought might be the volume and the cost. So the only thing the council has to do and should do is cover its cost. We're not here to make money out of business, and certainly as the head of economic development, that's the last thing I want to do, is be seen as a local authority that does that. So we set a fee of £42 per export health certificate. And I think our estimate is in the first month, it was definitely costing my team more to do each export health certificate than £42. But as they've become more experienced, and to pick up what was said from others, is as the businesses have got more experienced at it, that cost is coming down, the errors have gone down, and the efficiency has gone up in that sense. So we have decided to leave it till June before we feel that there's a pattern of the number of EHCs we have to issue, and the true cost that will be. At the end of the day, at the moment, I've around 8.5 full-time equivalent officers working on this, from admin up to a team manager. We will need more staff because of the rota system, because obviously at the moment we're limited in terms of the amount of people who can take leave and things like that. So we're going to have to staff up a bit further if we get the pattern. So we will then make a call on the actual cost that we will apply to each export health certificate. The other thing is that we're starting to see that obviously the exports are going up in volume, because obviously in beginning of January, a lot of exports were down because people were waiting to see how they're going. Already this month, we've had 92 certificates issued to go to Europe, whereas all of last month we only had 148. So we can see it. But then there's also the catching sector is changing every month. So at the moment it's pelagic time. A lot of mackerel, fresh mackerel has been exported. That will move to frozen in a few weeks' time. So there's a pattern that has to be developed for us to then work out what the annual cost of that would be and how we would apply it to business. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Maureen, back to you.
Thanks, convener. And in the interest of time, I'll ask them both together, although they're maybe not that related. I just wanted to ask Georgina, obviously Mowi is a company that works in Scotland and has product in Scotland and in Norway. I just wondered, Norway's not in the EU. Is it much easier to do it, to export through Norway? And is that what Mowi are doing at the moment, to the detriment of the trade from Scotland? And also, I mean, can the panel see any benefits of the new trade agreement that can be gained from the new setup? And how do the panel feel about the advice from Boris Johnson, which was to set up companies in the EU? Is that seriously what could be available to any of you?
Pretty wide question. So let's go to Georgina first, and then I'll look to see if anyone wants to come in on the other things. Georgina.
Okay, thank you, convener. I mean, the Scottish and Norwegian, they are two quite distinct origins. We must be very clear about that. For Norway to export to the EU, Norway are part of the European Free Trade Association, and within that they have an SPS agreement. So they do have to do an export declaration, an import declaration. Majority of it goes through Sweden and Denmark, but it's pretty streamlined and automated and online. Not the mountains of paper that we're all having to deal with at the moment. Interestingly, though, from the 1st of April, Norway, for goods coming in, for products of animal origin coming into the UK, they will require a paper health certificate. So it will be interesting to see how that development goes. Just to touch on the detriment of our product, I mean, we have to say it was our darkest hour when we were forced on the first Friday to cancel 2 trucks of Scottish origin going into a French retailer to push them towards Norwegian origin, because we had no certainty that it would arrive there. Thank you.
Okay, there was always that fear that if I couldn't find somebody to look away quickly enough, I'd have to nominate somebody to talk. Belinda, you popped up, and Tom, you might find yourself up next. So Belinda, I'll bring you in, and then Tom.
Thank you. I just want to address the Deputy Convener's question about, is there any upside to the additional processes we're going through? And the one that I could foresee, but it is definitely not here at the moment, is that if Scotland's certification process is of excellence and we can get it absolutely right, then the Scottish product itself will have an additional value to the consumer at the other end. And therefore, in the medium to longer term, there may be a higher value for having to go through the additional checks and balances. What we would like to be able to see for the North East, certainly, and I'm sure the rest of Scotland, is that we have the best product. We want to be exporting the best product and therefore getting the best price for our businesses. So if we can get to that stage, there may be a value in having the best and exporting the best. And therefore, the economic development will follow from that point of view. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, so I'm going to come to Tom, and then I'm going to go on to the next group of questions, which are going to be led off by John Finney. So, Tom, if you'd like to come in on that one.
Yeah, sure. Well, when I was speaking to our range of exporting processors today, I certainly wasn't finding any sort of rays of hope in terms of where we could be expanding our export business in the EU, that's for sure. It really was all about the challenges that they face, and we've heard many of them so far this evening in terms of the complication, the cost and the delays of trade. And there's other things in terms of, you know, the export certificates and the complications, and still the unanswered questions with export certifications from DEFRA that are putting challenges. So I think in terms of our red meat processors, we're dealing with the challenges here and now and trying to export to the EU. Bear in mind, you know, we're still suffering and in the midst of the COVID pandemic and the sort of massive impact that that's had on our red meat trade to the EU as well. So at the minute, and also the complications that that's had for the processing sector in Scotland as well, just trying to deal with those issues. So at the minute, I'm afraid that we're finding it difficult to find any green shoots or rays of hope in terms of business to the EU.
Okay, thanks, Tom. John Finney, would you like to lead off on the next bit, please? John.
Thank you, Convener, and good evening, panel. I've been having some connectivity issues, so perhaps broadcasting could put me to audio only, which will have a benefit for everyone, maybe, if they continue. Convener, much of the ground that I was going to cover has already been touched. I want to ask a question to each panel member, though, please, regarding the issue of disruption at the border, and it's a very fundamental one, which a couple of the panel members have already answered, and that is specifically whether the current difficulties in getting goods to the EU market could be considered to be teething problems, or whether they're more indicative of fundamental difficulties due to the terms of the new trade relationship between the EU and the UK. So teething problems or something fundamentally wrong. And perhaps if Mr. Green would kick off on that, and then other members, please.
Yeah, sure. Teething problems there were. No, I think that the issues are here to stay. I think one thing I comment on as well is that we have to take a paper health certificate with us all the way to France or wherever we're going to. And this is, in this year, 2021, it's a digital age. If there's something wrong with our paper certificate when we get to France, we have to send another one the next day. So the load could be held up while we send another paper certificate the next day. And if the UK government had agreed to go onto the electronic system operating in continental Europe, then we could actually make those amendments electronically. So I think there's some teething problems that have largely gone away. There are some problems that are here to stay, but I think there are some solutions as well that some lobbying needs to be done to get those solutions put in play, where this should be digitised. It's far too manual at the moment. We have to rely on for the health certificate, every page, as I understand it, every page has to be signed. We have a rubber stamp on it. It doesn't seem to fit in this day and age. So I think that's a really important consideration.
Thanks, Andy. Let's go to Mike Park. Sorry, John, do you mind if I just keep them moving through?
I had a particular bit. On you go. Yeah.
Okay. No. John, you go for it. Sorry, I was just trying to stop everyone answering at the same time. John.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I was conscious that earlier Mr. Charles had been very forthright in his view. And I wonder, Mr. Charles, if you think it is fundamental or whether these teething problems are surmountable, please.
I would say it's definitely fundamental. I think it's a very, very bad deal, and there's not much we can do about it. But there's two streams, yes. I'm sure the haulage companies and the departments will slowly grind towards making something happen that is reasonable. But if we want to get back to where we were, which was delivering quality product into Europe within 12 hours to 24 hours, something has got to fundamentally change, and that is renegotiating with Europe a much more streamlined and better system. You know, if we rewind to this, none of this was necessary pre-Brexit. So we were basically, the European Union are starting with a blank canvas. The negotiation was, as a past partner, which is something new, what kind of negotiation we could get for exporting our product into the market. And I think basically Scotland, Britain has massively powerful levers here. We have a European fleet fishing and taking our British asset, our Scottish asset, and delivering it back into Europe with no scrutiny whatsoever, very, very little management. If every single kilo that European fleet was catching was put under the scrutiny that fish exporters in Britain were having to provide in order to transfer those goods into Europe, there'd be absolute chaos. Now, surely there's a negotiation to be had there. And I think that needs to be the solution. We need to get government over there to negotiate a deal that makes this a far better and more streamlined system. And we do have powerful levers to do that. And it's going to need an awful lot of courage from government to do it. But this system that we have right here, right now, is destroying our export industry. And we won't end, we won't stop. But where this is leading to is lorries being filled with whole fish with one certificate on it heading into Europe. All the GVA that provides great economic benefit for our fishing communities is being ruined. And we're playing into the hands of the trucking industry. We were already up at about 60% trucking off our markets prior to Brexit. It's going to get worse.
Yes, I think that there's elements there that we will be coming on to. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Parr, please.
Yes, thank you, and thanks for the question or the opportunity to answer it. I mean, I think a lot of what Andrew said makes sense. I mean, there will be legacy issues here, and that legacy issues are the cost of getting the product to the continent, but also the time it's going to take to get to the continent. Unlike Mr. Charles, I believe all the powerful levers were traded away without a shadow of a doubt. But at the end of the day, I mean, this will become smoother. Things will be ironed out, but they will not be removed completely. And as I say, those legacy issues of cost and time to market will be the difference between now and what went in the past. So these are certainly the main issues. And Andrew's right. I mean, we do have some levers in terms of fish coming into the UK from foreign vessels going directly to France, but that's because they're not selling it in the UK. They're not selling it at all, and they're just transshipping it just to Europe. But you know, we always thought that non-tariff barriers would be the French kicking off at the Channel. No one ever believed that, whereas the system would never be great, that it would be as bad as what it is. And at the end of the day, we have a saying in the fishing industry that it all comes out of the cod end. Maybe some would disagree with that. But at the end of the day, we are now struggling for prices. We're now trying to get supply matched to demand. We've got vessels tying up. We've got vessels landing into Denmark. There's loads of distortion that's being created by the current mess up in terms of getting the product to the market.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wright, you said darkest hour. Is there brighter days ahead? Or are these teething problems or fundamental problem, please?
No, they're fundamental problems. I mean, we're coping, we're exporting, we're not going to stop pushing to export it. It's taking huge resource in Scotland and in France to move the product through. But, you know, in essence, the new normal is not acceptable. It's archaic. And as Eddie said, it all needs to be streamlined.
Can I ask panel members, would anyone like to comment on reports that one of the implications of this is the future viability of a number of companies, a number of enterprises as a result of present arrangements? Would anyone care to comment on that? I think we heard already about increased haulage charges, for instance. Mr. Gibson.
Tom's wanting to come in.
I think that is certainly a concern. We have businesses that export, and to be fair, it's some of our smaller exporters, but at the minute, because of the groupage issue, they have no route to market for their EU customers, and they are not planning to do anything soon, so there's certainly concerns there. I certainly think there'll be concerns also that businesses will contract in terms of some of their export ambitions, because it does become too difficult. There have been the teething problems, but I agree with the other panel members. It is systemic. You know, this system was never designed for the situation we're in just now. It was really designed for sending containers halfway around the world. And my real fear is there's an urgency required here, because the problems are going to keep coming further down the line, and they're going to keep coming fairly quickly. I mentioned earlier on that we're looking at reduced numbers of exports due to the loss of the food service business because of COVID in Europe and in the UK as well. But if we're talking about exports here, in January, the red meat companies probably only exported 25% of what they exported last January. Now, if you think if we're coming out of COVID and food service markets start to come back on and these volumes start to increase, where do we get to at the ports with the distribution when products are hitting France and Holland, and we're just going to exacerbate these issues? So I think there really has to be some urgency required in how we find these solutions.
Thank you. Mr. Park, would you care to comment on that, please?
I mean, this is systemic. I mean, and it is fundamental, the issues. But at the end of the day, I mean, let me take this back to Seaside again, that we have bigger problems than not bigger problems, but problems that are different from the shore sector in terms of getting the product to market. Our problem now is having enough fish to land to market to make a living for the fleet. So our situation is really difficult there. And in terms of lack of crew income, looking for other crew from non-UK. So we've got issues that are wider than getting the fish to market. But at the end of the day, if the processors can't buy fish with any degree of confidence in getting that fish to the marketplace, at the end of the day, everyone suffers. I mean, we all know that uncertainty is the devil of business. And unless you can remove that uncertainty from every link in the chain, then I think we all have a problem. One focus point that may change things is when Europe has to do the same as us. That point is approaching soon. And it may be that then holds our feet to the fire in terms of trying to work with the UK and trying to solve some of the issues.
I wonder, would any of the panel members care to comment on the arrangement between the border between Scotland and the north of Ireland? Any implications for yourselves, your operations? At all? Mr. Gibson, maybe? Mr. Gibson, you're muted. On you go. Thank you.
Sorry. We have a couple of companies that have been challenged with that. Certainly, we have a couple of exporters. There's a red meat company who do a lot of their packing and processing over in Northern Ireland, and they supply many of the main UK retailers. So the additional challenges for them getting product across to Northern Ireland has been an issue, and then bringing it back here. They also would then take product into Republic of Ireland for certain processes as well, and that gives sort of rules of origin issues when they bring it back to the UK. So again, for the first couple of weeks it was difficult, but that process out now is a lot smoother, and they're used to the process they have to go through. So again, it comes back to the time and cost to go through the processes that they require. It is getting through, the product is moving, but again, it's just everything is slow and with more added extra cost.
And I wonder, could you just clarify, Mr. Gibson, are the arrangements for Cairnryan Larne, for instance, exactly the same as Dover-Calais?
There are slight differences in terms of export health certificates. If you have, there are certain schemes in place for Northern Ireland where if you're a trusted trader, you can go over there without export health certificates, etc. But there are other requirements. So if you don't have a trusted trader status, but there's further easements being put in place for Northern Ireland to sort of smooth the process for taking goods over there. So it's slightly easier in some terms, but there's still a lot of added complication and paperwork from where they didn't have it before.
Mike, sorry, John, do you mind if I just come in briefly and ask a question on that?
Yes, of course, Convener. I was going to say I'm conscious of time, Convener. I'm content to leave my questions there. There's been a wide range covered earlier. Thank you very much, and thank you, Pat.
Okay. Thanks, John. My question is we are still importing quite a lot of goods into the United Kingdom. Irish beef is coming in, and do you think they're facing the same problems that we would be facing with our exports? Does anyone have knowledge of that? I mean, who would like to go on that? Tom, you're being very quiet, but
yeah,
Eddie.
I could.
Well, Eddie offered, so he's got you off the hook, Tom. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Eddie.
Currently, it's much easier, for certainly from continental Europe, for exporters to send their cargo to the UK. The health certificates are not being checked at the point of entry, and that's the challenge for us at the moment. That when we enter continental Europe, everything is checked on the border, and that there's a 6-month period where that's not necessary for importers into the UK. And 1st of July, it will change dramatically when everything is going to be checked at the point of entry. And I think, as I said earlier, that when it's seen from the other side, I think that there'll be a different reaction perhaps from continental Europe. But as it stands now, it's much easier to. In fact, there are very few barriers to import into the UK.
So, but you do think when importers to the UK experience the difficulties that we may be experiencing at the moment, that there will be a fundamental change of opinion and view and way of dealing with things?
I very much hope so, yes. I can't say that it will, but I very much hope so, because I know for sure Dutch transport companies bringing meat into the UK, and whereas they used to take exports back, they just simply refuse to take them now. It takes too much time out of their schedule to be held up at the border when they go back into Holland or France. So they just go back empty. It makes more sense for them. So that creates a distortion in the market, of course. But as I said, that's their experience. Easy to import to the UK, extremely difficult to export from the UK. So they don't do it.
Okay, Peter Chapman, you wanted to come in.
So Mike, I'm interested to know how the catching sector are responding to all this, Mike. We've heard of volumes in Peterhead down considerably, and the price of fish in the market down considerably. Where are we now? Are volumes coming back to more normal levels for the time of year, and are prices beginning to improve? And are all the boats, is the fleet all at sea, or are there still boats tied to the harbour wall? Where exactly are the catching sector at the moment, Mike, as far as you can tell us?
Thanks for the question, Peter. I mean, obviously, the catching sector isn't just one métier. There's a number of métiers in there. We've got the scallop sector currently struggling with price and with now increasing fuel costs. The nethrop sector, the langoustine sector, is trundling along. They managed to empty their cold stores towards Christmas, so they're kind of moving along. Obviously, at less sort of levels of catches because they've got to be very careful. The whitefish fleet is trying to get supply to meet demand, as I mentioned earlier, because demand from the continent is now weaker because of the uncertainty. So we have a number of vessels tying up for refit, a number of vessels taking 2 or 3 weeks ashore. We've got a number of vessels now landing into Denmark. But one of the problems we haven't discussed is the catching sector's output from the TCA. We now have significantly less fish to catch than we did previously. In fact, we're going to be about 4,000 to 5,000 tonne of fish in Peterhead this year short of where we were previously. Now, when an industry is dealing with a finite resource in terms of the quota, and that's all it can land, it can't land any more, then we've got to watch that we don't land that to market for a lesser price than we could do if we held on to that quota till later on in the year. So we're trying to manage a very fickle situation and an onshore situation as well, or aligned to that, which is in itself fickle. But, we know the income, the demersal sector last year was down 1/3 from the previous year. Now, that's a significant downturn. And at the start of this year, significantly downturn again in terms of the level of income. But the output of the TCA will mean, we think, just on initial results, unless we can pull a rabbit out of the hat at the bilateral negotiations going on with the EU and Norway just now, we do think that we could have to consolidate up to 20% of our fleet. It would just have to go missing. It would just have to be taken out of the system because we no longer have the opportunities to keep them at the sea. Now, the problem with that is that the Scottish catching sector is made up of a number of small family businesses. And when you have to sell up because you don't have enough quota to keep you at sea and to make money, the deepest pockets then buy that, which gravitates towards big business or whatever else, and we start to lose that family infrastructure. We employ less people at the ports. So we've got to be very careful about where we go from here on in terms of the catching sector.
Can I just come back on you know, one of the issues you mentioned, quota, obviously quota vitally important to the sector. Where are we with, you know, with international quota swaps? We're still hoping that they'll be able to get that system up and running again, as far as I'm aware. Mike, have you any knowledge as to how that negotiation is going on, or can we start getting the international quota swaps back up and running anytime soon?
Well, there's two parts to that question, if you don't mind, Peter, and I'll tease it apart. One, we've got the ongoing bilateral coastal state negotiations just now with Faroe, with the EU and with Norway, and we're looking to try and trade some fish out of there back into the country. So that's going on just now, and they probably won't be concluded till maybe first, second week of March. Ordinarily, they're done by the end of the year, but it's going to be the first, second week of March, we think. The mechanism you're talking about the international quota swaps, which was between basically organisations in the UK and organisations in Europe, we understand that largely is going to shut down. And what you will now have is just a sort of very infrequent swapping between the EU and the UK. But just to explain to people that are listening to this, the problem we've got in the industry is that a lot of people can't understand the complexity. And the government is saying, well, we got a 25% increase in volume. They didn't, it was value. So everyone gets more. The reality is, in fact, that we used to take 60 to 70% additional fish out of Europe, fish that they never caught, but which we had to buy and lease and swap off them. And that came into the sector. So in any year, we always ended up with 60 to 70% more haddock, more safe than we did or we were allocated. That's gone now. And that's the problem we now find ourselves in, that we have about 20% of our domestic sector just do not have enough fishing opportunities go past the first 3 months of this year. Now, that's dire for the processing sector as well, because immediately you can see the issue we have. There just won't be the fish coming in at a time when we should have been feeding off the sea of opportunity.
Right, Mike, I'm going to... Peter, thanks for that. I'm going to actually just bring in Emma Harper very briefly on a question she wanted to direct. Emma.
Thanks, convener. Just waiting a wee second there for my camera to come on. It was just really a quick sup back to Tom Gibson, but it probably is for everyone even just to think about or comment on. But we did get a late submission from the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation, and I know James Cook was supposed to attend tonight, and in the submission it apologises for not being able to take part. But it talks about the extra cost of a pallet load that can cost more to £650 for documentation prior to reaching the market at Boulogne-sur-Mer, and the transport costs, wages, ferries, and having to wait at ferries, etc. And so James Cook's submission was basically saying, who's going to pay for all these costs? And Tom Gibson, you mentioned that increased documentation for the red meat sector added extra costs as well. So who pays for all of that? Is it the customer? Or is it the consumer? Is it the fisherman? I mean, who pays for it all?
Hold on. Just before we go off on that, that was a huge question, Emma, and it was a brief one you asked for. So could you direct it at the one person you'd like? Because I do need to move on to some of the other sections as well, as we're halfway through our time. So If you'd like one person to answer that, Emma, and then I'm going to get Peter Chapman to take over the next section from Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, who's dropped off the call. So, Emma, one person, please.
Thanks. Apologies, convener. I didn't intend it to be a massive question, but Tom Gibson, I would appreciate, because Tom was the one that made my mind go that way.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. I think there'll be, as we go through this process just now, there's companies that I've been speaking to are trying to work out how the cost structure is going to have to be rescheduled, if you like. And the concerns for me is that what's going to happen is they're going to have to put an increase on the price to the end consumer or customer in the EU markets, which again will make us less competitive. And there will then be potentially a reduction in the farm gate prices for beef and lamb for prices going back to farmers. So I think it will be at both ends of the spectrum.
Okay, thank you. Peter Chapman, can you lead off the next section, as Jamie Halcrow-Johnson seems to have lost his Wi-Fi connection? If you're not happy to do it, I'm very happy to do it for him. Peter.
No, that's fine, convener. I'll do my best. There's a lot of questions in here about the IT systems, and we've heard quite a bit about the IT systems already being difficult and clunky, and you know, it's important that we can get rid of the paper and do it electronically. I mean, I think that's absolutely crucial to manage to make this system work a bit better. The question really is whether the just-in-time supply chains that we've been used to, you know, getting fish into Europe in less than 24 hours in many cases, whether that is possible now at all, or whether that is something that we just have lost unless we can streamline these systems. Maybe Andrew Charles would maybe like to lead off on that one, because he's right at the sharp end of the system. Is there a way we can? Do you see that we can get back to somewhere near where we used to be, Andrew, and maybe what we need to do is find solutions, as convener said. Have you got solutions to where these issues are, so that we can find a way forward that allows the job to become sensible again?
Yeah, I think there's two. I think there's two routes. There's the working with the systems we have, making them more streamlined, making them more cost effective, and making these systems as fast as possible, working with our European and rebuilding the relationship with our trading partners. I think that's important. If we win over our trading partners again and they gain their confidence, they will be directed for the customs to treat us a little bit better. And if customs and the imports authorities are on board and on our side, we can make this horrible system bearable. But on the other channel, it must be negotiation. We must get back to Europe, and we must talk about having a trusted trading relationship where we can fill lorries and get the fish directly to market as quickly as possible. And that must be our goal, because this is devastating. You know, I don't mind telling anybody, my export business has not sold 1 kilo of fish since the 21st of December. I refuse to send any fish until somebody guarantees me 24-hour delivery or guaranteed delivery on frozen. And at the present moment, I have no guarantees from the haulage services that they can do that. And there's many, many small processors like me, with the charges, with the inability to guarantee my customers delivery, that I'm going to export. I'm just going to reduce in size. I'm going to have less staff. I'm going to think small. And as Mike says, sea of opportunity. I scratch my head and wonder what that was all about. But the processing sector and the catching sector, at least the catching sector, and we were very lucky in this, they had 10 golden years of profitability whereas the processing sector, and we did a presentation to the Scottish Government on this, that the processing sector, with the margins that we work on, an average of about 2.5% to 3% margin, it's been dying at a time when the catching sector was growing and prospering. The processing sector, we were losing processors. We've already lost, I think, the back end of last year and into this year, 5 further processors have gone. The processing sector, somehow or other, is going to need a huge amount of support to take us through this exporting carbuncle that we're facing at the present moment.
Can I just ask you a wee bit more? Well, can I just ask a wee bit more, convener of Andrew? I mean, you obviously must be now concentrating on the home market because you haven't exported anything. And would you, if you were exporting, would you be part of this groupage scheme in that you could never fill a lorry full of your fish? You would have to be part of a part load. You would have to do it that way.
I have always been a small exporter. My customers buy very, very high quality, small amounts of product. I'll give you an example. I supply a company that I've dealt with for many, many years in Germany. And my average price to selling my product, which was monkfish, an average of £12 a kilo for that product. With the certification charges, I now have to charge my German customer £19 a kilo. He's not going to buy. He's going to buy from Iceland. He's going to buy from Norway. He's going to buy from Denmark. He will never buy from me at that certification level. And if government are serious about pooling the small exporter back into the market, because what I do in the market is I make a very good price for the fisherman. I might not buy huge volumes of fish, but I will bid on fish, which makes fish expensive. And there's many, many exporters like me. Take me out of it, and you're going to have a much lower priced product on the market. And I think what the Scottish Government have got to do is put in a certification support fund, which would immediately allow me to quote my customer a reasonable and fair market price and get me back into the market.
Okay,
so there are solutions. There are solutions. You know, if an exporter, say, exporting less than 250 kilo, cap his certification, complete certification charge at £15 a certificate, and create a fund to pay for the balance. At the end of the day, the money that's being raised on this certification is going into the government's coffers anyway.
Peter, I'd like to bring in Eddie, who can answer on the transport thing, and then probably Belinda, who can comment on that comment as far as the certification goes, or the health certificate. So Eddie first, followed by Belinda.
Yeah, just to go back to Peter Chapman's original question, has the just-in-time service gone away? No, definitely not. We are delivering and have been delivering fish from Scotland into France the next day. So our cut-off times are earlier. We need our orders in by 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning. Now, on that basis, we can still deliver groupage and full loads into France by 10 o'clock the next day. And then meet up with onward connections to go across Europe. So the service, I would say, is back to where it was, except that, so we've had this overnight service into France, except that the cut-off time for receiving earliers is now 6 or 7 hours earlier. So that's the extension that we see. So I think that's the important response to the question, really.
Okay. Belinda, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I suppose to answer Peter's question, a lot of it will be down to knowing our customers. So from our perspective, we're here to, as much as possible, to be as efficient and as quick as possible to issue an export health certificate. If it's going to one single destination in Europe, it's probably the easiest thing to do because it's one language, one set of paperwork. If we've got it going through a number of countries, that's when it becomes a slightly longer and more process orientated. So, for example, if it was going to Spain, it needs to be in both French, Spanish, and English, and every page would then have to have as mentioned earlier, sort of annotations and stamped on it. What we've found already within the last 6 weeks is that the most important thing is if we know that businesses are wanting to get something by 10 o'clock in the morning, and they tell us that they're going to be wanting it by 10 o'clock in the morning, we will definitely be able to do that. It's to answer Peter's question, if it's suddenly like, I want it now, we just don't have the time. The amount of paperwork that's required to be printed off and checked and double checked wouldn't allow us to do that. So there's always going to be a delay, I think, as Eddie has just pointed out. But once we get to know our customers even better, we'll probably be able to do that in a quicker and more efficient way in the next few months.
Okay, Ian, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, it was just actually to support what Eddie was saying, that we are now seeing day one for day two consignments now happening more frequently. So it is absolutely possible. But the one thing that is important to note is that there are issues with the IT systems, with ECHO, Export Certification Online system. There are issues with regard to the consignment numbers and so forth with HMRC, commodity codes. And the overall message here is that we're dealing with clunky UK government systems here that we are trying our best to work around. FSS today met with Scottish Government and APHA and DEFRA officials to share with them the challenges that we are experiencing in the certification process. And we were advised today that a project is kicking off to try and resolve them and at least prioritise the challenges around the certification process there. So further green shoots to report, Convener.
Okay, and I'm going to go to Georgina, and then I'm going to come back to Andrew, and then I'm going to bring Jamie Halcrow-Johnson in, whose Wi-Fi I think has come back up. So Georgina first.
Yes, we have moved day one to day two, but because the system and the procedures are so complex and disparate, there's so much room for errors, but it's wobbly. And, it's not just going into France, you're meeting connections across Europe. And, fundamentally, we are losing our logistical advantage. It's just over 500 miles from Larkhall to Boulogne, and it's close to 1,500 from Ullesund on the west coast of Norway. And pretty much the product's getting there at the same age, at the same time. So we really need to get back to a sort of just-in-time and a much slicker system.
Okay, and Andrew, I promised I'd come back to you. Perhaps you, in what you're saying, could also just develop so I can understand as the issue that you raised about difficulties or that are put there to slow things down, because it sounds a bit like to me going with your passport and checking letter by letter rather than understanding the principle of what you're trying to do, just to make sure that the paperwork's correct rather than what you're trying to do is correct. Andrew.
Yeah, as was spoken about earlier, we've got to be absolutely meticulous with our certificates. Everything's got to be dotted, the I's crossed, everything's got to be done perfectly. And when you talk about 6 hours earlier, where on earth do we get the hours earlier in the day? We start at 6 o'clock in the morning. We've got to get that final product, volumes, species, etc., by 11 o'clock. So as a processor, you're not going to do it. So immediately you're going to sell for the next day. So your product is now 24 hours older than it used to be, because you'd have been normally sending away same day product, but you can't do physically. It's impossible to do that now if you're going to do the paperwork correctly. So we're dealing with a product that's an extra 24 hours older. I agree with DFDS, and I have to say, I think they do, what they've been put through, they've done a fantastic job in attempting to manage this. And yes, they are getting same day delivery now, but the members who I speak to find that the fish arrives into Boulogne at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and then it's held up by European officials checking just in time to miss the transfer to the next destination. And that by missing that next link means that product is a further 24 hours. So we've lost 24 hours, and then we lose another 24 hours. So we're 2 days quality behind where we used to be. And that is massively important, particularly if you're dealing with very specialist species, and particularly rays. That just loses you the ability to trade.
Andrew, thank you. Jamie, I think you're back in to the meeting. Peter had taken your sort of areas down. Well, you've been following it, so I'll let you go on with where you want to go from.
Yes, thanks very much. Sorry about that. Yes, I would say that being a Highlands and Islands MSP, you sometimes suffer from IT issues, but unfortunately I'm in Edinburgh at the moment, so there's no real excuse there. I just wanted to actually follow up on some of the questions that have been asked, and hopefully I'm not repeating anything because or things that have been asked before, but I was just very kind of interested in the comments that Andrew was talking about just there, and issues around kind of paperwork and IT systems. Obviously, I think that was a question that you knew the answer to be, but I just wondered whether if there was the e-systems or the e-certificate systems that I think everybody wants to get to at a bare minimum, how does that improve in terms of things like pre-population of information on those certificates? Because obviously, if the information's got to be entered automatically, is that still an issue? Would that provide scope there? I know it's around kind of some of the health certificates rather than some of the other bits of the paperwork, but maybe Andrew could answer that. And I also wanted to ask him what discussions he might have had with government, or it's something that he's raised with them around this idea of a support fund to cover some of the costs of the certificates, perhaps in the interim until a smoother system that I think everybody is agreed needs to happen.
Anything, any electronic system, any improvement, any way that we can speed this up to reduce the 48-hour delay that we're experiencing on our fish at the present moment will be hugely welcome. And if we can get back to that next day delivery by streamlining everything, we have a chance. That doesn't help the cost that I spoke about in knocking out all these small exporters that won't be able to bid in the market and make the premium prices our fishermen have been used to. So we must drive very hard to streamline that. As far as informing government, there is a frustration because we went to government 2 years ago and we said to government, this is what was going to happen. We said we were going to have massive problems. And I can't help feeling that possibly we are missing not having a dedicated fisheries minister in government. Because had those concerns which we raised time and time again been taken seriously, we could have possibly been negotiating with Europe a year and a half ago and setting up systems that would have avoided all this happening in the first place. If we could a year and a half ago had systems in place that were streamlined, we were possibly being a trusted trader. The European boats are landing in Europe, in Scotland. We want to sell our fish to Scotland. There was a huge amount of vested interest for Europe and Scotland to be talking about having a good system here. And I think that's been a missed opportunity.
Very much. I mean, I was just wondering, I mean, you talk about government there, but you'd mentioned the Scottish Government and this support fund. Have you had any conversations have you raised this with the Scottish Government? And have you had any kind of encouraging sounds or?
None whatsoever.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that.
It's a bit like business rates. When you mention support, it falls on deaf ears when you're in the processing sector. For some obscure reason, manufacturing is not taken seriously by government. And that's not just the Scottish government, it's the British government as well.
Okay, I certainly couldn't note that, Andrew. Can I ask, and I'm very conscious of time, and Convener, I think you wanted us to move fairly quickly. So one of the questions I had was what the impact of the ban on the export of unpurified shellfish from the UK to the EU will have on Scottish shellfish exporters. I don't know who wants to come in on that one in the first instance.
Well, no one's raising a hand and no one's looking away very quickly. So I'm not sure who I'm going to go to on that. I mean, do you want to talk about that? Ian, I wonder if you could come in a bit on that to start with.
We are aware of the challenges around LBM exports or live bivalve mollusk exports and scallops. I think that the position that the EU are taking on this is under current challenge. The UK government's position on this is that they do not accept the Commission's view insofar as the restriction of export of LBMs, and I believe that this is something that is being worked through negotiation as we speak. And short of that, I've got nothing further to add other than to say that this will have an impact, clearly. But until the matter is resolved with the EU, I don't see that there's much more can be done.
Okay, thanks very much. I think Mike had his hand up as well. I don't know if he wanted to come in on that.
Go, Mike.
Yeah, it was just to say that it is limited to bivalve mollusks. We don't tend to export many live scallops. That's not to say there isn't any exported, but we don't export many. I do know this is devastating news for the especially the mussel sector and some of the large mussel farms down in England and Wales. But hopefully the government can resolve. I mean, we have seen a letter that George Eustace wrote to the European Commission, setting out what their thoughts were on the issue. So hopefully they can get together and resolve the issue, because if they can't, it is going to wipe out a small but necessary sector of the industry.
Peter, you want to come in, and then Peter wants to come in, and then I'm going to move to Colin.
It was just a comment, really. I wonder if Mike or Ian will agree, but I was of the opinion that this was only concerning mollusks in Class B waters, and all the waters around Scotland are Class A waters, so it shouldn't be an issue as far as Scottish fishing fleet's concerned. Am I correct in that assumption?
Ian, is that you?
And there's no shellfish from Class B waters in Scotland being exported.
Okay. It looks like that's a problem that it's a pity we don't have James Cook to answer, but he may be listening and he may be able to submit evidence just for our information to help. Colin, let's go to Colin Smith. You've got some questions you want to lead off on. Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. I suddenly appeared. Thank you. I mean, the next section, Convener, was obviously focused on the implications of post-Brexit requirements, specifically for supply chain, haulage and logistics. But I'm very conscious, I think a lot of the points have actually already been covered. I'm just ticking through them with a lot of issues around problems associated with multiple consignments being loaded onto the same lorry, the lateness of the rollout of processes. So, I mean, if anybody wants to expand on those points, then I'm sure we'll be quite happy to hear that. But I suppose one of the questions I did have that hasn't really been covered in a lot of detail is the fact I'm very conscious as the Scottish Parliament Committee and what specific issues around supply chain are the responsibility of the Scottish Government rather than as a result of, I suppose, UK-wide processes, and what specifically could be done through the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government to ease things when it comes to some of those supply chain issues.
Who'd like to head off on that? Maybe that's an Eddie issue to start with, is it?
I can try, but I'm actually not aware of anything that's been imposed by the Scottish Government that makes a difference to what's going on. It's a UK-wide thing. Yeah, just not aware of anything different. Especially
Ian, you put an R in. Hold on. Give a moment to your microphone to live up.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, I would agree with Eddie. You know, Scottish Government, along with Food Standards Scotland, have been working flat out to do what we can. A lot of the systems that we're talking about here, Colin, are UK government driven, and a lot of this is reserved. So we are working with APHA, Animal and Plant Health Agency. We're working with DEFRA to resolve some of the challenges around the systemic challenges that are fundamental to the process. I think it's worthwhile reflecting that we are now a third country to the EU, and we are now subject to the processes that the EU expect. And with the IT systems that we're working with at the moment, all we're doing within Scotland is reflecting back those challenges. And I don't know if you picked up the comment I made earlier that Brexit advisors have been funded, 2 of them to work within Seafood Scotland by Scottish Government, and FSS has brought in SMAS to undertake further independent review of all of these systems, transactions that are taking place within Scotland, in the hope that we can identify any possibilities to streamline further.
So Ian, you touched on there though, so that was specific support. So is that really what the work the Scottish Government can do, the Scottish Parliament can do, if you like, is purely around support for companies to deal with these challenges? There's obviously we can't change the mechanisms. Is it purely around support? And maybe I don't know if the panel have got any views on what additional support might be available or potentially available.
Yeah, so the systems are clearly defined. They are the policy responsibility for these sits within DEFRA and APHA, and we are simply contributing to that. And over and above the huge amounts of support that we're providing in terms of, as I've already said, SMAS and the Brexit advisors, and indeed all the additional official time that's going in. So myself, we have loaded in additional support that we're not charging for to help the hubs. And it is more about that support mechanism, Colin, locally. Really can't really think of much else.
I don't know if the panel is any of the panel, other members of the panel, got any views on if there is, what additional support you would need to have.
Andrew, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I completely agree that, you know, this is a British structure, but I think the Scottish Government could do a huge amount to engage with Europe to using this structure. Like, for example, why can we not custom seal a lorry in Glasgow with a European custom seal and drive that lorry straight through to market? Now, that could be a negotiation by the Scottish Government to have some kind of relationship, and it would be a good example of Scotland engaging with Europe. Have they attempted to do this? We raised this was going to be a problem a year and a half, 2 years ago. Has there been any discussion to say, look, this is the system, we can't change it, we've got to work within the British system, but can we have an arrangement? And I think that's where we need the Scottish Government really to come up to the plate and try and devise systems that can get our industry back to where it was. And I think if I'd be interested to hear from the haulage that if we could have a system where we could be European custom sealed and the lorry drives straight to market, is that something that is feasible? We've a blank canvas here. It's very rare to have a partner who's left the European Union. So we're making the rules. The £70 import charge, the £50 British charge for exporting, these prices were plucked out of the sky. They were just made up. So let's make the rules. Let's create the rules to get the industry back on board, because we really need it. With what's going on with COVID, and we've an army of vets checking dead fish instead of giving people vaccinations. It's a really poor show for government for what's going on in this present climate at the present moment. We must learn to be more resourceful.
Anyone else want to come in on that? Raise your hand if you want to. Colin, you frightened them all away. Have you got another question?
I think we're at a loss as to other means of help, and I think that Andrew raised a very important point. I mean, the rules of leaving the EU and trading obviously with the EU were obviously never intended for a country that has such a huge level of trade with the EU, and I think that that's clearly become one of the challenges that have been highlighted this evening. It's a very valid point, Andrew. Can we find a way to manage processes that clearly were never designed for the scale of trade that we've obviously got with the rest of Europe? Absolutely.
Eddie wanted to come in, I think, Colin. He may.
No, only to support the point that Andrew made, actually, because if you think just the sheer volume of fish that's going from Scotland into Boulogne and the checks that are being made in Scotland, if there was a closer cooperation between the authorities in Boulogne and in Scotland, then maybe some understanding and agreement could be made that some of these everyday checks are taken away. And you know, as I said before, we are moving fish and seafood for the same people every day to the same people, and it's the same product. So it should be a simple and streamlined process, really. So if that cooperation could increase, I think it could make everybody's life a little easier.
Okay, I'm going to go to Belinda. You're going to waive all your charges for Aberdeen Council, is that right? No, sorry.
Yeah, good try. I suppose I'll not be allowed back in to see my team if I didn't put a plea in for saying that, you know, where are we going to get the long-term qualified staff to do this? So, you know, under the regulations, it has to be a qualified vet or a qualified environmental health officer. Certainly on the latter, they're not easy to come by. We don't have enough environmental health officers, and we don't have enough coming through the education system either. So if I was putting a plea in for something, it would be because both of COVID as well as in terms of export certificates, we're going to need more environmental health officers. We need more people skilled up and able to do that piece of work. So that would be something I think the Scottish Parliament, Scottish Government does have some influence over in comparison to some of the other elements.
Thanks, Belinda. Ian, did you want to come in on that? Or have I missed you?
Just a very quick point, Convener. And it's just that there needs to be, I think, a little bit of a reality check insofar as that, you know, the ability to change these rules are not necessarily entirely within our gift. These are laid down by the EU and are informed explicitly by the nature of the deal that has been negotiated by UK government. And I hate to say the terms the new normal, but there are elements of what we are seeing now that we will have to simply adjust to. Yes, we will get better at process and will become more effective and efficient with less mistakes throughout. But there are elements of this that we will have limited opportunity to influence.
Okay. I guess it would, Georgina, you've kept very quiet on this, but have you got areas where you think help could be given?
Yeah, I agree with Andrew on. I don't see why there couldn't be a, you know, an export lounge in Larkhall. That makes complete sense. But I think the Scottish Government, they do, and I think they are communicating directly with the EU. But also there needs to be very strong cooperation between Scotland and UK government, because fundamentally it's UK government, DEFRA, AFA, and there needs to be a greater push for the review of the interpretation of the standards. Ian has mentioned in previous meetings that this has been done by the supplier declaration. And just for everyone's benefit, the supplier declaration is released each day, and we're confirming each day that we're the same supplier that we were the day before, from the identical premises that we were exporting from the day before. But so it just, the push needs to continue, you know, because fundamentally we can't accept the new norm as it is, and we just all need to keep pushing Scottish Government and UK Government and communicating with the EU to improve the current situation.
Okay, thanks, Georgina. Colin, is that you? Are you satisfied with that?
I think so. I think most of the points have
move
already been covered.
Thank you, Colin. I'm going to move on to the next lot of questions, which are going to be led off by Emma Harper. Emma.
Thanks, convener. I will just kick off this bunch of questions. It's about what support is out there from the UK government and the Scottish government. And in our briefing papers, it says that on the 19th of January 2021, so that was 19 days into EU exit end of transition, so the UK government announced new financial support for the UK's fishing businesses that export to the EU. And the support was worth £23 million, and it aims to support businesses most adversely affected by the COVID pandemic and the challenges of adjusting to new export requirements. And I had to read that twice because we're here tonight talking about the impact of post-Brexit requirements on Scottish exports and supply chains. So, and we know that there are challenges with COVID and challenges with exiting the EU, so makes me think about why we didn't extend the exit transition period as well. But there has been funding from the Scottish Government and then the UK Government as well. So I'm interested on your thoughts about support and whether additional support needs to be required. So we could talk about not just seafood, but the red meat industry as well.
Okay, everyone looked away very quickly there. Tom, why don't you start off with that?
Yeah, I think our processors certainly are looking for an element of support to help with covering some of the additional costs that they've incurred. Scottish Association of Meat Wholesalers, SAMW, put out a survey on export costs and additional costs to their members in January, and come back with some numbers that they passed to the Cabinet Secretary for forwarding on to the UK government. So there are certainly support elements out there that could be put towards, for example, the extra £1 million worth of export health certificate costs that they have to incur, and a lot of that is through private export health certificates as well. So there's certainly areas like that, and there's certain areas for lost business. You know, for example, the export health certificate issue where we can't export fresh mince, and that company that have the biggest issue there have lost £1.5 million contract as it stands. You know, where do we get that back from? That has knock-on effects to the carcass balance and raises the price of the other elements of the carcass. And it gives us an issue again, making it less competitive. So we really have issues out there on a number of fronts from the red meat industry that we could certainly require and do with some support from UK government in these issues.
Okay, Mike Park, do you want to come in on that?
Can I just pass on that just now? I was trying to get rid of one of my grandchildren for a second, so can I just pass on that one? Yeah.
I would sort your grandchildren out, and then we'll come back to you. Andrew, you've made some suggestions. Do you want to add any more to what you've said already?
Yeah, it's been interesting this week with the 23 million funding, and many businesses feel that they're not going to get any assistance whatsoever with that money. For example, myself. I won't get any assistance because I haven't exported, but I've lost out, and I've lost out through no fault of my own. So assistance there would be greatly appreciated and assistance can come in many ways. Business rates, let's get rid of them, and let's allow the manufacturing businesses to really drive forward over the next few years. Business rates, the certification fund, pooling in all these very valuable traders back onto the market, give the small medium exporters the ability to get back into the market and re-engage with their customers will have a massive impact after COVID starts to fade away. And then of course COVID. which has had a huge impact on the industry. Support needed there. But there's a lot of invisible losses. It's what we haven't done. It's not what we're doing. It's what we used to do compared to what we're doing now. And that's all very provable. So it's not a question of just handing somebody a check for no reason. You can very easily go in and say, well, how many kilos did you export last year compared to this year? And you can find ways to support the processing sector. But my goodness, the processing sector, particularly the fish processing sector, is going to need a huge amount of support. And we've a lot to look forward to, because we have one of the finest fishing fleets in the world. We've got a great resource out there, and we've got great opportunity. It's just so sad to see that GVA disappear into the backs of lorries, whole fish being taken away from our fishing communities, and we're losing a massive, massive opportunity. But again, frustrating, because it's one we've informed government about for the last 10 years of what needed to be doing. We put a plan forward for recovery, growth, expansion in our industry, and unfortunately the fish processing sector hasn't really received the attention it's desperately needed. But let's hope things are changing, and maybe government will be a little bit more focused, and we'll see a lot more support heading our way in the near future.
So, Ian, because I put Belinda under pressure and said she was going to waive all her invoices, which she denied, is one way of support you waiving all of your invoices? Or do you have a better idea?
I mean, clearly we are in the position similar to Belinda, in that we are in this simply to recover costs. We are doing all we can to lessen the impact. We've got really quite positive numbers that are coming out that, you know, certification, one certificate we can get down to probably about £20 if the process can be consistent and it's maintained like that. But, you know, when you're adding in, you know, lots of hours because there is a need to ensure information is correct, then you've got people having to sit on their hands waiting for corrections to be made. And at some point, the one thing we have to recognise is that somebody somewhere has to pay for this. But we're not profiteering. There are examples of profiteering out there. As I mentioned, £800 has been quoted for one export certificate by a veterinary certifier in the private sector. We are very much less expensive than that, and we are only interested in covering our costs. To do anything other than that would be placing a further burden on the taxpayer.
Okay, Emma.
Thanks, everybody. I know a lot of information has been covered already, and like Andrew mentioned, certain support that could not be met as far as criteria for certain businesses. That's very interesting to hear about. And I'm interested about like our inshore fishermen or our live exporters. Should the live exporters be basically put at the front of the queue when they're heading, when their produce is trying to get to the European markets?
That's probably to Ian, or is it, or to Eddie? I mean, can you prioritise? Okay, Eddie.
So the question was, can we put certain things at the front of the queue? Was that the question? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us it's a question of as soon as the goods arrive, we get them out as quickly as we can. So it's difficult to say that some things will go faster than others. We just take it as quickly as we can. I think everything goes out the same day, where possible, and most of the time that is possible. So I don't think it's literally hours we're talking about. If I'm honest, I'm slightly distracted looking at the departure times of all the trucks from Larkhall this evening, and most of them are away by 6 o'clock, which is what we expect, and the groupage trailers are a little bit later. So the smaller consignments are a little bit behind, but they'll all be there in the morning in France.
Okay.
I just have a final wee question from me. We still don't have an equivalent of a protected geographical indication status for our beef and our lamb and our salmon, and you know, that might be linked or might not be linked as getting the best produce to the European markets. Is that something that is a concern if we're looking at supply chains and the best produce getting to the European markets?
Who would like to go with that? Georgina, salmon mentioned. Perhaps you'd like to suggest talk on that.
I'm not fully up to speed on that point, but because there was discussion pre-Brexit, and I got caught up in the past month, so I'm not fully up to speed on that point, unfortunately.
That's fine. Mike, do you want to talk on that, or Tom? Tom.
You, Edward. Yeah. In terms of the PGIs, you know, that there was always a worry for us in terms of the EU PGIs and could we keep them and what would happen with them going forward. The EU PGIs are still in place and they're still recognised. We are still members of the EU scheme, so we will still be proudly displaying the EU PGIs on our products. And there's no requirement to take that off because we are still part of the EU scheme for PGIs. The UK GI scheme that is being introduced was announced at the start of the year. Our understanding is if you have a PGI from the EU, that will be carried over into the UK GIs as well, and the UK GIs will kick into play be mandatory, on the 1st of January 2024. It will be interesting to see in the meantime how the UK government actually markets that to the consumer, because at the minute we have absolutely no idea we know what the logos look like, but the consumer hasn't seen it yet. So the discussion process that we're going through just now, Emma, is to speak to our processors and our retailers and say this is coming down the line. But there is so much equity in the EU PGIs that we're telling our retailers and our processors to continue using them absolutely where possible, and that's what we're advising for our businesses and retailers to do.
Thanks for that, Tom. You're right with that, Emma. Maureen's got a question, and just before I come to it, I was going to give everyone a warning of my final question, which is going to be on the basis of we are where we are, what is one thing that you think could be done to make things better? So that will be my final question, give you all a moment to think about it, and I'm going to go to the Deputy Convener, Maureen Watt, now to have a quick question while you're thinking about
it. In my place as Deputy, so you have the last word, Convener, that's fine. You know, clearly we're in a perfect storm with Brexit and COVID, but I was wondering what you think organisations, or if there's an opportunity for organisations like QMS and Seafish Scotland to be in a position to help us expand the market, hoping all the things that we've talked about have been ironed out and settled down, when the tourism sector and the economies in Europe and in Scotland, well, UK-wide, start to open up again. What can Seafish Scotland and QMS be doing to start having, you know, great kind of export drives?
Tom, do you want to go on that?
Absolutely, no problem. So yeah, we've got a lot lined up. Hopefully when we get back to trying to drive some market development and drive some business. In terms of the Scotland Food and Drink recovery plan, we've got a number of elements on that plan that are QMS suggestions that will take it forward both in the UK market and the export market. We're working with SDI just now on a virtual global food service summit to look at export business development in Europe and also further afield. We've had great success with Scotch beef over the past 2 years, getting exports to Japan and getting exports to Canada, and really building that. In terms of the the sort of non-EU export business that we've seen over the 5 years from 2015 to 2020, that's risen something like 80% in terms of product going outside of the EU. And that, a part of that was because we were trying to build those markets with the threat of Brexit coming up. The big issue that we've got just now is export trade shows, which we have been attending on a regular basis. They still keep getting postponed or pushed back just because of COVID. So we're not as hopeful for seeing as many of them going forward, but we think the virtual side of things will be a new opportunity for us, and it'll just be a different way of doing things. I think rather than taking processors to trade shows and meeting potential customers at trade shows, the big opportunity for us is to do the initial face-to-face meeting via the virtual summit and the virtual environment, and then following that up with specific in-market visits to potential importers, buyers, distributors. We've got potentially new markets coming online as well. Okay, things again have slowed down, but potentially we have the USA opening up for a processor this year. There's other countries. China beef has been kicking about for a while, but hasn't really made much progress. But there's other countries and there's other markets that we can look to as well. So we're very focused on, there's a lot we can do in the UK. There's plenty we can do in Europe once we get some of these issues ironed out. And there's some third country markets out there as well that we think Scotch beef and Scotch lamb and specially selected pork could do incredibly well in.
Mike, do you want to come in on the fish side of it?
Yes, I mean, it's obviously the group is called Seafood Scotland. Seafish is the national body, and they derive their money from a levy against the fish at first sale. And they've always been restricted in what they could do in terms of labelling it Scottish or whatever because of state aid rules. Now, obviously, we're moving away from state aid rules, so perhaps on a national basis, Seafish could help identify the product as well. The Seafood Scotland under Donna is doing a great job. She's the new chief executive. She's doing a tremendous job. And with others is working to invest in the future in terms of trying to find new markets. Obviously, as the previous gentleman said, it's been difficult. A lot of the trade shows have been cancelled, but there is a huge degree of optimism that in Scotland we land and supply an extremely quality-driven seafood product, and hopefully in the future we can take that to market and expand the base that we currently supply.
Thank you, Mike. I am, Maureen, going to go to my final question now because we're coming up against the clock, as it were. And I'm going to go round and ask you, on the basis of what I said, we are where we are, one thing we can do to make things better. So I'm going to go to Mike Park, start with, then Ian. So Mike, followed by Ian.
Okay, thank you, convener. I mean, take away from the breadth of the discussion we've had here tonight, there is one particular issue that makes the catching sector's life extremely difficult this year, and that is having enough fish to land to market. And what we would dearly like is to have the international quota swapping mechanism reinstated to allow us to suck fish out of Europe for our vessels to land to market. Because it is galling, and Andrew's mentioned it twice now, it is galling when we see foreign fishing vessels fishing in our waters, landing into our ports, and trucking it immediately to Europe. That grinds us significantly. So if it was one thing we could change, it would be to reinstate the international mechanism whereby we can suck more fish into the UK for our vessels to land. Because in the absence of that, you will start to see a slow demise of the industry over the next 5 to 5.5 years.
Thank you, Mike. Ian, followed by Belinda.
Thank you, convener. Obviously, I would have to be looking at this through the lens of certification. So for me, it would be improved functionality of UK government systems, coupled to improvements in the accuracy and completeness of supplier paperwork.
Thank you. Belinda. Belinda, followed by Eddie.
Thank you, convener. Similar to Ian, to the lens of the actual process, I think one of the things that we would like to see is clarity on the destinations when we get to Europe. So we've talked about the difference in coloured of stamps and writing of ink. If we can have one system, that means that it would speed up an awful lot of our processes at our end and hopefully at their end as well.
Okay. Eddie, followed by Georgina.
Almost exactly the same as Belinda just said, in fact, to digitise this whole system, get rid of the paper, connect to the systems in Europe. There's a huge amount of duplication of input right now. We put the same data in for an export declaration, and then we have to repeat that again for the import declaration on the other side. So just streamlining the whole thing so we're not having to carry paper certificates from England to continental Europe, that we've got an electronic certification, and that would make things so much easier.
Okay, perfect. Georgina, followed by Tom.
Yes, thank you. Quite simply, again, to streamline the system. I mean, the costs are spiralling of this, and it needs to get back into control. Yeah, it's all about streamlining the system.
Okay, Tom, followed by Andrew.
I think from our point of view, you know, Scotch beef and Scotch lamb exports to the EU still account for the high 90% of our exports. So for us, it would really be about building a new relationship with the EU and improving engagement with the EU. We're not going to see a sort of resolution to a lot of these issues until we have a new relationship that fosters cooperation and has a will on both sides to continue to trade and continue to trade positively.
Okay, and Andrew, finally.
Very much simplify the process and crying out for a support fund on certification costs. But I suppose the biggest idea of all would be, let's rejoin the European Union, and we may have to wait for an election for that one.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. And what I would say to you all is thank you very much for joining us this evening and contributing to the evidence session that we've had. I'm very conscious that I started the first session this morning for the committee at 8 o'clock this morning, and I am finishing it at 8 o'clock this evening. So that's a long day for everyone, and I thank all of you for giving evidence and all the committee members for helping me so much this evening to make sure we got the best from our session, which I think we did. So thank you very much, and that concludes our committee business today. Thank you.